what's going on? My name is Harrison, and this is going to be a Unreal Engine 4 C++ tutorial on how to open doors using the overlap function and using Lerp. So let's go ahead and look at the final product right now. So we have some doors. As soon as I overlap, it'll open. We can also rotate it, go through it. Then the door will also rotate or open depending on which way we're facing. So then it'll open backwards. So right now we're behind the door. And as soon as we leave the overlap, the door will close. And again, that goes same with all the other doors you make. So anyways, you never have to watch the video. There should be a GitHub link down in the description below if you want to just take the code and move along. But if not, let's continue with the video. Delete this from the game world and recreate it in C++. All right, get rid of that, and that. All right, right click, new class, actor, next. I'm gonna call it open door with Lerp. And create class. Okay, awesome. The engine just created the files for us, so let's go ahead and jump to the header file first. Oh, and again, I am using the standard first person template along with the starter content. So again, back into the code. Let's go ahead and jump into the header file, and first let's include box component so we can overlap it. Include components / box component. And now let's go ahead and declare variables. What do we want first? Let's go ahead and do our static mesh, and that's going to be a U property. We can edit anywhere. We're just going to call it door. Next, we'll want a box component. U box component, and we'll just call that box component. Next, we'll want a couple of overlap functions. I get these overlap functions from the documentation, so I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to put the links in the description below, but I'm just going to go ahead and copy the functions themselves, or at least the parameters. So this is for on open overlap or on over. So we'll do U function void on overlap begin, and then I'm going to paste in the parameters. And then I'm going to do the same thing for on overlap end. There are different parameters for each one. Void on overlap end. And I do put class right in front of uPrimitive component. That's just for fun. It's not needed, but alright, then we'll create a couple more variables. Bool for open to determine if the door is open or not. The float for the rotate value, how much we want to rotate the door, whether it's 90 degrees or negative 90 degrees. And then we'll just get an F rotator for the door's current rotation, depending on what we loop through. F, that's all right now. It is not all capitalized. F. Alright, that should be good. Now let's go and jump into the CPP file and move along. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to want to include the Kismet math. So let's go include, what's the path for it? It is Kismet / Kismet math library.h. Did I spell that right? Alright, I think we're good. And we'll use one of their functions down in the later overlap functions to determine if we're in front or behind the door. To begin off, let's just start with open equals false for the door. The door will start off closed unless you want otherwise. Let's set up our components. My box, or I think we just called it box component. Box component equals create default subobject create default sub object. And that will be a box component, or a uBox component rather. Put in some text, and it's going to be my box component. We can also init the size of the box. That'll be box component. Is it init box extent? I believe it is. I'll double check in a second. And that'll take an F vector. And for this one, I'm just going to do all 50s. I guess just to be clean up with the F's there for floats. And then init box extent. I think that's correct. Init box extent. Yeah. And now for the box component, we're going to set it as the root component, so we don't rotate the component. We just want to rotate the door mesh itself. So no, it's root component equals box component. All right, now let's do our stack mesh. And that's going to be door equals create default sub object. That's going to be a uStatic mesh. Or uStatic mesh component, I believe, right? Yeah. Text my door. Door, there's a couple things I want to do with it. I do want to set the relative location because the pivot point for the door is at the bottom corner of the door, so it rotates on its side axis and not in the center. So I do want to position it more in the center of the box component, so there's no kind of offsetting. So we're going to do door set relative location, I believe. Yeah, and that's going to be an F vector. And it'll just be, what is it? It's 0, 50, negative 50. Good there. And then we're going to attach it to the root component. We have setup attachment to setup. Yeah, just setup attachment. We're going to set it to the root component. All right, so we're done with setting up the attribute. Now we want to connect the overlap events. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Again, this will happen in the constructor file. Box component. How do we do this? It's arrow operator on component begin overlap. Then it's dot add dynamic, and overlap. We're referring to this component, and we want to reference this actor's overlap function, which is a open door with lerp, and we're gonna trigger the on overlap begin function. We will create that in just a second. Okay. I'm just gonna copy and paste it because we're gonna do something similar for the end overlap. So instead of begin, we'll put end, and instead of on overlap begin, we'll put on overlap end. Now let's jump down into the tick function. So we're not going to do anything with the begin play function. That should stay as is. Jumping over to the tick function. Let's set this up. For every tick, we want to get the door rotation. So I'm going to set door rotation to our stack mesh's relative rotation. If the door is open, so if open is true, we want to lerp through. A lerp function does have to happen in the tick function. Door set relative rotation, and this will be an fmath lerp. I'm going to use fquat, and to set the relative rotation, I'm going to use quaternions instead of rotations, because sometimes there's bugs in rotation, so I think fquat might just be a safer way. Although I haven't ran into any bugs with this door in particular with rotations, but just to be safe, I'm going to use some fquats. But I'm sure you'll be fine with rotations. So an fquat does take in a rotator, so I'm going to pass in the rotation that we got earlier in the tick function. So fquat door rotation, then another fquat will be a f rotator. It's going to be 0 rotate value, which we declare in the header file, but we will set later on in the overlap function, because it will be 90 or negative 90. And we are rotating over the yaw, I believe. Yeah, so float and pitch, float, and float, roll. So float, 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 and then we set the time, right? No, close that out, comma. And yeah, then we set the alpha, which for this one I will set 0, 1. It should be a number between 0 and 1. And to get a smooth opening door, that's not too fast, I'm using 0.01. So else, if door open is false, then let's lerp back to 0. Basically, let's close the door when we leave the door. Set relative. You know what? Just to be fast, let's copy and paste it. But instead of rotate value, we're going to just do 0. Now let's jump over here and create our onOverlap and an onOverlap begin functions. It's going to be void a open door with lerp, and this is onOverlap begin. Then we're going to want another one for onOverlap end. I'm going to copy and paste the parameters from the header file. I'm going to do the same thing with onOverlap end. And now let's do the onOverlap function. First, let's do our checks. So if other actor does not null, and other actor, put that in parentheses, isn't this, and one more, the other comp is not null. So if that passes, we'll continue. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that and put it into the end overlap. We'll be using it again. Okay, so this will probably be the most complicated logic, but it's not very hard. So as soon as we overlap over, what do we want to do? We want to get the location of our pawn, of our character. So what we're going to do is just make a variable called pawn location, and equal that to the other actor, which is a parameter, which it'll be us, the pawn, the character, and we'll get the actor location. Turn that. Next, we want to get the direction. You know, are we in front of the door or behind the door? So the first step is to get our current actor subtracted from the pawn's location. So I'm just going to call it direction and equal get actor location minus pawn location. But we're still not done yet. Now we're going to use a kismat function. Epic provides content examples in blueprints. They have a very big content example blueprint Unreal Engine for demo setup. So from that's where I'm getting this function. That's where I'm going to run the next function. In the blueprint, I believe it's called unrotate vector, and in Kismet, it's called the less vector rotator function. So that was confusing, but anyways, let's go ahead and do that so we get the correct direction. So I'm going to say direction equals u Kismet math library less underscore vector rotator, and from there we're going to pass in direction and we're going to pass in the get actor rotation, so we can rotate the actor around, and this should still work just fine. Semicolon. Let me jump over to the less function right now, we have it open right here. So Kismet math library less vector rotator. It returns the result of vector A rotated by the inverse of rotator B. So that's kind of, this link will be in the description below. I can't do a better description than that. But Epic has done an excellent job in providing that for us. So we're going to use it, and we will get the right direction, and it will result into a number that's positive or negative. And depending on that, if the direction dot x, so we are getting the x value again. This does come from the content examples done in Blueprints, done in Epic's content examples. If it's greater than 0, we want to set the rotate value to 90. Else, so if it's less than 0, we want to set the rotate value to negative 90. So it opens up backwards. And then finally, let's set open to true. That's it for the overlap function. Let's jump back into the end function. Open equals false. So when I leave, close the door. Again, you can edit it however you want. If you don't want the door to close, that's completely up to you. Let's compile and see what happens. I got some errors. Let's debug it. Get over with real quick. What should be preceded by this? All right, so I think I'm missing a semicolon somewhere. Oh, it's in my header file, my bad. No semicolon there, and then no semicolon there. My fault. Let's compile it again. I think I have more relative rotation. Let's see what happens. Alright. Alright, so on line 19, I have create default object, has to be create default subobject. Create default subobject, my fault. Did I not say undeclared identifier, vstack mesh component? Oh, is it a capital O or lowercase O? I think it's a capitalized or uppercase O. No, it's lowercase. All right. Go back to lowercase O's. Door, line 39. My fault. Line 53. It's C++ is double arrows, right? No. It's just single arrow, so just single, or I mean single equal sign for conditional statements. 75. Okay, yeah, I copy and paste that, so only single equals for conditional statements. Alright, after about 19 errors, we're good to go. Okay, let's drag in our door lerp. Let's bring it in. The first thing we want to do, go into box component, scroll down to collisions, instead of overlap all dynamic, let's change that to trigger. Now click on the door, go down to where the mesh should be, and I'm going to put in the door mesh. I'm going to click this actor, push end so it drops to the floor. Oh, that didn't work. Drop, oh, that didn't work. Jeez. Unclick it, click it again, push end so it drops to the floor. Now let's push play. I run up to it, and it opens, closes, run behind it, closes. One cool trick we can do, I'm going to push the tick sign in the top left, tick, so I can show my console commands. Show collisions. And now we can see the collision. So now we do see the box that we made. It's the 50 by 50 by 50 box. So when we get in there, it opens, and when we leave it, it closes. Now let's get it. I'm going to push Alt to make a duplicate of it. And now I'm going to rotate it. E, rotate, and it should be the same result, right? So now it opens this way successfully, and behind it successful as well. So that should be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.